Hello. Check, check. Tā alofa lava, whakalofa lahi atu ki matolu o si, ni sa pula vinaka. Welcome everyone to the auditorium, to this session. My name is Chillion Sanerivi, and I happen to be the co-chair of Taiohi. And so it's quite exciting and a privilege and an honor for me to be sitting here with these amazing humans as we talk about the topic that's on the screen. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then after that I'm going to set the scene and just keep you guys in the loop of other things that's coming up. Is that all good? Are we feeling good? Yeah, that only sounded like two people. Come on, y'all. I know. Yeah, oh, thank you, thank you. Whoever knows me, I love you. Thank you. Okay, I'll pass it over to the team on the stage to introduce themselves.
Talofa lava, kia ora koutou katoa, ko Andy Costa, toko ingoa, kai whakahaere, toi hau tangata, Social Investment Agency, no ingarangi aku tūpuna e tupu aki au ki Tamaki Makaurau, ke te noho au ki Whanganui Atara. Greetings everyone, Andrew Costa, I'm the Secretary for Social Investment.
Kia ora. Ko wai au, ko takitemo nā pai maunga, ko oreti te awa, I tipu aki au ki Aotearoa I te tau 2001 I haere mai au ki Aotearoa no Waikato me Aotearoa o ki tipuna kei te noho au ki Murahiku no Wahaupai ahau kei te Rourou One Aotearoa Foundation ahau e mahi ana ko Shaz Reece toko ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Shaz. I am the Insights Lead for Te Rourou One Aotearoa Foundation, which is the charitable arm of One New Zealand, and I am part of the Invercargill Initiative.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Finlay-Robinson toku ingoa no ko te mana pōrane e rangi oku tupuna. I tipu aki o ki Waikato, me whangarei, me otatahi, e noho rongo Waitakere I te maunga me te taha oponuku te awa ko Tamaki Makaurau e noho ana. E mahi ana o hei manager ki Pou Manaaki Taiohi o Aotearoa, aka Scope Aotearoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora whānau, my name is Sarah Finlay-Robinson. I am the manager at Pou Manaaki Taiohi o Aotearoa, previously known as Scope Aotearoa Charitable Trust, and we work with youth organisations to build capability using a number of tools, including the Scope Review tool.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarangi te whakapapa mai, ko Oxford te whenua tupu, ko London te kāinga, I noho o ki tāhuna ke poi peripi o I noho ana, he co-founder and impact strategy lead o I Hands for Impact, ko Claudia Wace toko ingoa, tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings everyone. Firstly, what a privilege to be here. Thank you. My name is Claudia Wace. My family and my ancestors are all back in the UK, and I call London home. I had the privilege of living in Queenstown, and then recently moved to Melbourne. And I'm one of the co-founders and the impact strategy lead for Hands for Impact.
Awesome. Oh, kia ora, no mai, haere mai. This is the scene. So I'm welcoming these guys into my Samoan home. This is my Samoan home. And they're going to be explaining to me this topic that you see on the screen, because I know nothing, like nothing. I don't know what we're talking about. Yoange, whai mai si puki. That means tea's coming. So the kōrero, the talanoanga that we're having is exploring the potential of social investment approach and practical monitoring and evaluating approaches that youth development organisations can adopt. Andrew Costa. Now, many people in today's audience are uncomfortable with the idea of reducing the dynamic young people that they work with daily to numbers or an output. Now, I'm mindful that you can almost add any word now onto social. You know, like there's social well-being, there's social cohesion, there's social connection, there's social development, and so on and so on. But what we're talking about here is social investment. Now, can you tell us your definition of the social investment approach and a bit about what the social investment agency hopes to achieve?
Absolutely, thank you. And before doing that, I might just give you a bit of a sense of what's drawn me into social investment, because it's really part of the answer to this question. I spent most of my working career in the police. It was an amazing opportunity to see some of the best of what's happening out there in communities, but also many of the challenges. And one of the things that I observed out there is that the way government turns up in communities isn't always as helpful as it could be, and that we don't necessarily do the best that we can to enable organisations that are making an amazing difference in communities to do that in the best possible way. And it's very clear to me that for some of the most challenging situations that people face, that the answer lies in communities and community organisations more so than it does in government. Social investment is about ensuring that we get the best possible outcomes for the finite amount of investment that government makes in improving those outcomes. And it is in many ways the opposite of looking at outputs, because a lot of what government does at the moment when it commissions activity in the community is it prescribes the outputs, the activities that should happen. There's a lot of widgets that have to be counted at the moment with the way government engages organisations, and there's not enough attention paid to what are the outcomes that we're getting from the activity. And the way that we contract and the way we engage often means that organisations end up having to be more focused on the prescription of activity that has come from Wellington, rather than being able to really focus on the people that they're working with and the results that they're able to get together with them. So there are lots of angles to social investment. I could go on a long time, but I think the key point in responding to your question is to say we want to see organisations enabled to achieve outcomes for the people that they are working with. And we're very focused on working alongside organisations, particularly through the Social Investment Fund, to understand who are the people they are supporting, what would be the best approach to engaging that activity to get the best outcomes that we could get, and how would we know that they're being achieved. Because in the end, being able to demonstrate that we're achieving outcomes is a great way to justify more funding. And so that's the kaupapa, really.
Claudia, can you tell us about the monitoring and evaluation process in general and the role social return of investment assessments plays in telling an organisation's story? What will social return of investment work that you are doing with Aotearoa tell us about the youth development, that tells us about the youth development sector?
Yeah, for sure. So I've got a few slides. And I guess just like first kind of state, so the reason, so this is the monitoring evaluation process that I use when working with organizations. And I guess the reason why I wanted to bring it up is that I think monitoring evaluation is the core part when you start thinking about social return on investment, impact measurement. Like, this is the part that I think is really important for organizations to build. And people have a range of experience with it, and this is really focusing on anyone who's interested to learn a little bit more. So the process, so you start kind of setting your purpose and your objectives, and I think there's two tiers to this. Firstly, thinking about why are you going on this process in the first place. Usually it's for funding reasons, but more often than not, and where I think it's really powerful, is about how can you improve your organization services, build better relationships with your stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I don't just mean, the people that you work with, but funders, your staff. There's a whole range of stakeholders. And then once you've kind of defined that and why you're doing your monitoring evaluation, you then think about your program or your organization. and think about, okay, well, what is it that what are we trying to do here? What is our context? Sometimes say, what's your problem? But that can be deficit framing. So think about your context. Why are you doing the work that you're doing? Then you want to think about, okay, what is our solution? What are we doing to answer this question? And then moving into kind of what does success look like? You can then, so that can be your starting point. Another way you can do that is looking at a theory of change. I like also using something called a planning triangle that just has your activities at the bottom, your outcomes, and then your impact at the beginning. And then you can move into a theory of change and grow from there. Once this feels really clear, and this is when you start moving from that kind of intuitive instinct to more of an intentional practice, you can start thinking about, okay, now I know what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it. Let's think about how we're going to make sure that we've got progress. And this is when you move into choosing your indicators. And here it's really important to have both your delivery indicators, so make sure you know that you're tracking, that you're creating change, that you're delivering as planned, and then your change indicators. And this is really around your outcomes. So yeah, kind of going through that process and then deciding how you want to collect your data. And this is important because I think there's a real, what methods make sense for your context. You can do surveys, there's obviously interviews. I think observation is a really powerful aspect of that, and understanding how change is tracking. And then thinking about, okay, who's collecting it, when are you collecting it, and where does it go? And then finally, and really importantly, embedding this into your organization to make sure that you reflect, you adapt, and you improve. And yeah, I think this is a process that really helps organizations move from kind of instinct to intention, as I mentioned. And so as I mentioned, you've got this, and then you have your theory of change at the beginning with your purpose and your objectives. This is when I think you can start adding different lenses. And again, just reiterating that is your core, building an intentional practice, and then start exploring different ways. So we practice the social value lens at Hands for Impact, and we talked about it in the presentation yesterday, and if you want to learn more, please reach out at Hands for Impact. But the social value principles and the social value lens is an amazing lens that essentially asks you about what matters most to the people affected by the program, and using that insight to make better decisions. And it really helps us focus on changes that are meaningful and not just measurable. And so in a kind of youth development practice, I think it's, obviously there's outcomes that we want to work towards in terms of employment and education, but we know that there are other outcomes that are necessary and foundational that enables these kind of longer term outcomes to happen. So this lens helps you discover that within your stakeholders. And then you have a social return on investment. There's lots of words on the screen, but I think if we were just to boil it down, we start with what a return on investment is, and you think about, okay, what do I put in and what do I get out? And then if you think social return on investment, it takes a more holistic lens and thinks, okay, with all that I put into this program, and I don't just mean money, I also mean human resources, I also mean physical resources, and also knowledge and cultural resources. What you put in, and then what do you get out? And it's not just economic outcomes, it's social outcomes, environmental outcomes, and it tells that kind of wider, holistic story of change. And again, just reiterating, I see these as different layers of insights, and I think it's about making a decision for your organization, what works best for you, and these are just 2 insights that we use. There's a whole range of different tools and kapapa that you can build on to kind of layer your monitoring and evaluation system that works for you, but just reiterating that that's your starting point and a theory of change, and then you can explore a social value lens or a social return on investment, and that's usually very useful in a kind of funding and policy space and might not be necessary. So yeah, that's a bit of that. And so yeah, I guess the work that Hands for Impact has been doing in a partnership with Aotearoa, we've structured our work in 2 phases, and we've been looking at how to tell the story of youth work with social return on investment. Our first phase, we've been doing 2 in-depth studies with 2 youth work organizations that kind of fit in the bracket that wouldn't have necessarily invested in this process, and we're really trying to tell a grassroots stories of social return on investment and youth work. And the idea is that those findings is going to then kind of contribute into our phase B, where we take a bit more of a sector lens of understanding the change, why that change matters, and how to use that change to kind of make better decisions with that evidence. So yeah, really excited. And I guess the motivations around that, and motivations for me, it's all around, it's not about building individual ships, it's about rising the tide as a collective. I don't believe that organisations need to reinvent the wheel. There's space for nuance and context in terms of how activity is delivered, how money is spent, but I think we can be agreed on shared outcomes that kind of sit within the practice of youth development. So yeah, that's kind of the work that we've been doing.
Awesome, thank you. And I just want to encourage our sector that maybe what you're reading on the screen is like, whoa, too much words, I don't understand, there's acronyms there. If anything, this is about telling your story, the impact of your story, and that the work that we do, it changes lives. And it's because we do good work, y'all. All of us do good work. We change lives, we save lives. And all this is, it's about reconfiguring it a bit so that you're able to tell your story better, and just adding other things like theory of change if it sounds very foreign to you. Shaz, your mahi has a longitudinal approach. Can you tell us about the benefits of the approach for young people and their communities?
Yes, I can do that. So the Invercargill Initiative is a 5-year place-based initiative. So traditionally, Te Rourou was a national funder, and the idea came about that if we invest in one place over a longer period, that we will see greater impact. That's just the overall vision of it. And we are there to enable rangatahi to thrive. So, we do the 5 years, and it's not just because obviously putting more money and time into something is going to have more impact, but because we're trying to create systems change. And we know that systems change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in 1-year funding cycles. And it became really obvious very early on that it wasn't going to happen in the 5 years that we had committed to Invercargill. So the idea is to invest in a community to build it and strengthen it and enable it to create its own change in the long term. So that's kind of what we do. We come in and we invest in these communities. Everything that we do is community-led right from the outset. So before me and my 2 teammates started, Te Rourou went down to Invercargill, did a lot of research, used IDI data to identify where the greatest need was for rangatahi. And then took that data back to the community and said, what does this look like in your context? And how do you think we can come in and try and help this, try and fix this? And so the community were the ones that created our focus areas. They're the ones that told us what to focus on. And then we went to them again and said, okay, here's a heap of money, fund what you think will help these areas. So we used participatory funding methods. We invited community members onto panels, and they allocated funding, about $800,000 worth of funding in our first 2 years. And we kind of worked really closely with those community organisations to understand the impact that was happening there. It's all very kind of, we're just rolling with it. The 3 of us had not been in philanthropy, but we had been in the community. We are absolutely embedded in the community. And we come from different strengths. But one of the things that the youth sector told us was that it was disconnected, siloed, under-resourced, and what they asked for was a backbone organisation that would help bring the sector together. And so that's where my teammates Mandy and Stacey come in. They are community catalysts, and their entire role is around bringing the sector together. And they've been doing that for 3 years now, and I'm quite happy to sit here and say that the youth sector in Invercargill will tell you that it's never been so connected. They're more than just putting funding, because they have discretionary funding. They're a time resource that these organisations just don't have. They just don't have the time to do those things. And so I'm the insights lead, and I came in as a developmental evaluator, whatever that means. I Googled it as I applied for the job. But I've changed that. the whole idea was to find the impact that we were having as a funder. And I kind of couldn't understand that unless I understood the impact that the community was having for itself. And so I am also a resource for our community in understanding that. I used to be a journalist, that's what I'm trained in. And so I use my storytelling and video skills to kind of bring that out for the community. So we're trying to turn that traditional funding model on its head and try to actually incorporate ourselves into the community because we care about the community so much. A really good example of the impact of valuing the community as the experts in their own lives is our Rangatahi Māori Fund. So one of our po is supporting Māori aspirations. It is not up to me to decide how rangatahi Māori can better support their aspirations. So we asked rangatahi Māori to come together and we formed our fund, which they named Te Ohaka Tīwhera. And so we have 10 rangatahi who sit on a panel and they make their own funding decisions about how them and their peers can better connect to te ao Māori. And as a funder, it can be hard to kind of let go and give the decision to someone else. Sometimes they would talk about things that they wanted to fund and get excited about them, and we would be like, oh, is that what you want to do? And they told us early on that one of the things that they connect with the most is taonga tākaro. They told us that in Invercargill they were experiencing a lot of racism, that they were asked to teach other schools how to play kiorahi on matariki. And they said, I want to go after school and play kiorahi mainstream. I want it to be mainstream. And so the resource of Mandy and Stacey went out and worked out how they could make that happen. So they helped our young people form a sports trust. And the young people funded into that trust. They're on the board of that trust. And now kiorahi is a mainstream sport in Southland. Every high school and nearly every primary school plays weekly tournaments, reffed by paid rangatahi, and it's free for all rangatahi who want to play. We have hundreds of rangatahi playing every week. Yes. So, I mean, that's just an example of real systems change that you can make by enabling the lived experience to make their own decisions on what their future looks like.
Great work, Shaz. That deserves an applause. Sarah, your work looks at quality as well as impact. Can you tell us a bit about the difference between the two and how your work with Scope considers these two concepts?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. I want to start and say that being on this panel is a little bit intimidating. I love hearing the voices of Taiohi and having them shape the decisions and the work that we do. And I wear two hats. So Manaaki Taiohi is a core of what I do, and I also am really invested in whaiwahitanga. So I'm going to try and weave the two together a little bit, because as I'm sitting here, I really just see that that's important. So let me start. Quality is building good systems and practice. It is about being a safe organisation, about good bicultural practice and treaty of Waitangi and treaty partnership. It is good youth development based on really good understanding of what works. It's good governance and good management and building those community connections so that organisations can be resilient and young people can be resilient. I think, too, it considers the past so that we can learn and reflect on it. And that's an important part of evaluation. But also, we really need to consider the present and where we're going in the future. We've got to be able to look forward. So measuring the impact of what we've done is great. We also really need to consider what we're doing now with young people and building in cycles of reflection so that we're continuing to make sure that what we're delivering is what rangatahi are saying they want and they need from us. It includes Mātauranga Māori, and it includes AI, I love that, ancestor intelligence, as Daisy was saying. It looks at models of practice from Aotearoa and not just about importing stuff from overseas. It considers the context, the specific context, not only of Aotearoa, but of your particular community in which you're working. And it builds sustainably, looking ahead, thinking about climate impact and how we're building a better future, not only for our Taiohi, but also for our whenua. And it's about having the skilled policies, or skilled staff and policies that support all that to happen, hey? And about having the systems in our organisations that release our incredible youth workers to do the work that they do, and to ensure that young people have the support that they need. It's about having a theory of change, and our theory of change is positive youth development, or mana taiohi. And it's looking at those understandings of how we apply that within our community. So we already have a theory of change, hey? And it's about centralising the voices and experiences of Taiohi in the present and being able to continually reflect on that so that it is their agency, their goals, their agenda, which is foremost to the work that we're doing. Not something that a policy direction has come from, or not something that those of us who are youth adjacent or perhaps even further on are thinking are the things that young people need now. It is about being informed by our community, our whānau, our taiohi. And impact's important. Yes, it's about the difference you made that gets calculated at the end. It's about the story of the difference that you made. It's about the community connections you build, the resources you've used and the resources you've developed. It's about your footprint on Te Taio, the partnerships you've built, and ultimately the lives changed. That's why we do what we do, hey, for the impact. But we can't separate it from the ongoing process of considering and reflecting on the work that we're doing. I'm going to show you a little slide. I'm a teacher. I used to teach on the Bachelor of Youth Development, and Kelly was a student, so bear with me. I just go into teacher mode. So I want to simplify a little bit the whole process of monitoring and evaluation. Claudia, this will probably look familiar to you. So we start with program design. When we're working with our youth workers to design a program and with our young people, we are setting up what are the goals of this program, what are we trying to achieve, and we set our indicators at the beginning. And that's the time when we can gather some baseline data about who are the young people that are coming into this program or that, we're beginning to mentor, and, tell us a little bit about their goals, what they're wanting to get out of this, what are the skills they want to develop, what are the connections they're wanting to develop. Then we go into delivery. And as we go through delivery, we are also getting insights from young people. We're also collecting data about what's working and how we're tracking with their agenda, their goals, so that we can tweak our design and delivery, right? There's no point setting out to deliver a mentoring program that's 10 weeks long and we're wanting to do some in-depth work when we get to 10 weeks and young people are like, I'm only just starting to really get the benefit of it. So we need to have those processes where we're continuing to reflect on the work that we're doing and understanding what might we need to change, what might we need to tweak. Are there any unintended consequences of the work that we're doing that we didn't factor in. Then we get to the program end, woohoo, big celebration. Whatever way we mark it with young people, just celebrate the end of their time with us or the end of that program. And we gather data then to say, yay, cool, you've developed these skills, you've built these connections, these are the things that matter to you that were achieved in that time. And that is your immediate kind of impact or your short-term outcomes. If you like, the program design is the seeds, the delivery is the nurturing and the planting of the seed and growing it into a seedling. The program end is where we've got a little tiny tree that still needs support, and hopefully we've wrapped some really good community support around that seedling. Then we get into outcomes, which are usually well beyond the period of our program, which often we don't get a chance to measure because that requires external evaluation and more funding. Heading into long-term outcomes, like beautiful longitudinal studies, when we get to measure, oh my goodness, what is the long-term impact of what we've done for this community? The tricky thing is, when we get to long-term outcomes, even sometimes medium-term outcomes, we're not the only ones responsible for some of those changes. And we can't forget that young people have their own agency as well. They're also part of participating in this and having their own agency and determining for themselves and making change for themselves. So we can't take all the credit. This is why I think understanding where we're working at as organisations and programs is really important to build in those cycles of reflection. And that is what the scope review process does for organisations. So we come in and we work with an organisation. We've got a beautiful group of assessors who are from the sector, youth workers, all experienced youth workers with incredible skill across many different forms of youth work, who come in and assess an organisation based on your bicultural practice, your safe practice, your youth development, your management and your governance, and your community connectedness. And we work with you to discover what it is that young people are saying, what it is that whānau are saying, what community is saying, what key stakeholders are saying about the work that you do, and what staff, what board members, what managers are even finding about the work that you do. And we work with you to grow your capability across those areas. Part of the capability that we grow is in this area of program design and enabling you to discover, is the work that you're doing having the impact or having the benefit or having the value. Value is a word we like. Having the value that we want it to have for young people and that young people want it to have. Kia ora, Kelly.
Thanks, Sarah. I felt like I was back in class for Bachelor of Youth Development. But she knows what she's talking about when we think about this topic. And when we're talking about social investment, that's one part, but we don't neglect what we already know, which is the youth participation, the youth voice, the strengths-based approach that we have in our sector. And so it's just fusing those two together again so that we are able to tell our story better. Because we know that we do good work, the young people know that we do good work, but government agencies don't necessarily think that we do the good work, so how can we start speaking in that language? Because it's a mindset, and it's a practice, but it is also a discipline. In merging all of those things together. Andy Costa, coming back to you. What can youth development organisations do to demonstrate the impact of their work with young people?
Yeah, great question. Look, one of the things that's really important to acknowledge is that there are so many different things that we do across the community to improve social outcomes, and they can't all be measured in exactly the same way. What I might do is contrast a little bit of what we're doing with the Social Investment Fund and then go on to speak a bit about what it might mean for youth organisations. One of the early things we're doing in social investment is establishing the Social Investment Fund. That's going to focus initially on some really early investments that can make a difference for some of the whānau that are most struggling in our communities. And you may have seen yesterday an announcement about the groups that we're focused on with the fund. Those investments will be, organisations will have the opportunity to come forward if they're working with those groups, and as part of coming forward, the conversation with those organisations will be, who is it that you're working with? What are the outcomes that you can achieve with the people you're working with? What's your theory of change? What's the mechanism by which those outcomes are likely to be achieved? And then importantly, how would we measure them? And so that actually becomes a conversation with those organisations to say, how would we know whether that change is being achieved? The Social Investment Agency has some tools that we can bring to that and data expertise that we can bring to that. So we will be, for the organisations that are successful through that process, working alongside them to understand how we can track the outcomes. And then, you know, we do have the advantage of being able to see the longer term outcomes that often are very hard for organisations to be able to measure when they don't have the same kind of access that we have. So for those very focused investments, which are really about supporting early in life course, which is so much in contrast to what we see in a lot of government investment, it ends up being at the crisis end. We're trying to really say, how would we take a long-term lens on this and understand through someone's life course the difference that we're making. Of course, many youth organisations are not going to be working in exactly that space, and so we're not trying to make one size fit all here. This is about saying, across a wide range of things that we do, how can we get a better understanding of the impact or value that's being achieved and tell a story around that is compelling for the communities we're serving, for the young people that we're working with, and also for funders to be able to say, yeah, I'd like to do more of that. So for organisations, the process that a couple of our panellists have described is very sound. What are the outcomes? For whom do we think we can achieve those outcomes? How are we going to go about doing it? Is there an evidence base that will work? And when we say evidence base, we don't necessarily just mean a Western science evidence base. We acknowledge that there are many different bodies of knowledge from which theories of change will draw. But what is our mechanism by which we think change occurs? And then how will we measure it? How will we know? And if organisations are applying that to the way they work, then they're a good way down the track for the things that we're looking for in the context of social investment. So we don't need to overcomplicate it, but I think we should acknowledge that so much of what we are doing at the moment, particularly where government funding is concerned, we're not going that step of understanding what the result of it was. And I think that's disempowering for the organisations that are trying to make a difference in the community, particularly where it has come as a result of government prescription about the activities and not enough attention to the outcomes. So there's a common interest we all have to know whether the thing we're trying to do is actually being achieved.
Cool. I'm now just thinking for our sector, like we've heard all four of the panellists talk about theory of change. And if that's very new to you, I think the tip that I learned through the Bachelor of Youth Development is the logic model. Same. It's just another different way of describing logic model, which is the theory of change, just as a tip for our sector. I forgot to mention earlier, I encourage you, if you do have any questions for the panellists, to scan the QR code that you see behind me, because there'll be an opportunity a little bit later to ask the panellists those questions. Thank you, Andy. Sarah, back to you.
Kia ora.
How can youth development organisations show the value of work they are doing with young people? You did touch on it with your earlier answer.
Yeah, I got on a flow. I think one thing I want to say is that Sometimes monitoring and evaluation speak can feel like it sits with a particular position or a particular desk in an organisation, and I'm really passionate, probably partly because of my BYD experience, because I'm really passionate about youth workers and youth organisations being recognised for the skill that you have, and because of the work that we're doing at Manaaki, Taiohi or Aotearoa. This sector has the skills to do this work, and I don't think we need to be afraid of it. Yeah. We already understand theory of change, it's just a new way of describing it. With positive youth development, mana Taiohi is a theory of change, and then we have our particular models that we use to back that up. And those very things, the very aspects in those models are the things that inform that theory of change and the things that we measure as our indicators. We've just got to get a bit more specific and savvy about, okay, so how does that show up in our programs, and what are the particular things that we use to mark that? We're looking for milestones, and it's about building in some process evaluation into the programs that we're already delivering. So this isn't hard, and I'm really passionate about youth organisations and youth workers having the skill to do this. And yeah, Kelly was subject to the program logic model that I taught at BYD, but it was that image that I showed you earlier, and we can break this down and make this really simple and easy for organisations to understand. In your program design, how do you do this? Let's be honest, in this field, our outputs are always high. I'm a mum of a 6-year-old, and I always have a lot of laundry. And I'm just going to do this to kind of ground it a little bit. And sometimes we're measuring KPIs or we're measuring outputs, and actually the thing that my 6-year-old wants most is for me to play exploding kittens with him. And it's the time spent, it's the relationship. And if we're too busy measuring whether we've done the load of laundry today, we miss out on some of the good stuff. So I challenge us to stop measuring the outputs so much. They're part of it, yes, but nowhere near as important as are we reaching. For young people, what are the key things? For whānau, what are the key things? What have they said that they want and they need from us? What is it that we're doing with community and in partnership, and how are we measuring that? So we want to measure the connections that we build with young people, that, the strengthening connections. We want to measure the skills and the character that young people develop, that we know as part of positive youth development. We want to measure their increased sense of identity and belonging. We want to measure their sense of increased modi and their sense of agency and the mobility of a young person to make decisions for themselves. Are they in crisis all the time, or are they actually able to make good decisions about housing and thinking about their future and the kind of work that they want to do, or the kind of life they want to have? Or are they too busy just managing day to day? It's about measuring the strengthened relationships that we help Taiohi develop with their whānau and their community. Those are the things that we're talking about. One thing I really love about the work that we do at Manaaki Taiohi is that we get to see the transformation for organisations in the work. We get to hear from Taiohi about the incredible relationships that they build with youth workers and the confidence that that gives them in their identity and their belonging and their ability to build connections with peers and the difference that it makes to their lives. We get to hear from community about the difference that youth organisations play in building community connection and cohesion. We get to hear from iwi about the strengthened treaty partnership and bicultural practice that youth organisations are now delivering. It's incredible. And I've been privileged to talk to a couple of managers of youth organisations over involved who, you know, get to tell us about their experience of using this kind of review process. And I think, you know, we've got to have these moments where we build in some feedback loops and some cycles of reflection in our work and give ourselves the chance to think about where we're at, where we're going, and the chance to build our capability. And we can do that best when we partner together. For Manaaki Taiohi, we've been developed by the sector, for the sector, and we're just keen to partner. So, you know, while the Social Investment Agency might have a higher bar around, you know, who they'll accept, you know, we're of us and for us. And we're keen, you know, in whatever capacity to talk with you about how we can make this easy.
Cool. Claudia, can you share some ways that organisations can start collecting, monitoring and evaluation data?
Yeah. I mean, I think Sarah could probably answer it better. I mean, I guess one thing I want to just say before we go into it is recognising that this sort of investment in infrastructure of an organisation, I mean, like a monitoring and evaluation system, spending time doing a theory of change requires time, resource, and a whole lot of minds coming together to do that. And I think, and that's one thing what Hands for Impact has been created is around improving accessibility for impact measurement for charitable organisations, because we recognise that there is an accessibility issue in terms of spending time and doing this process. And also I think we are met with a belief that investing in infrastructure of charitable organisations is a negative, almost. Like it's around, you know, like having low operational costs is seen as a good thing. And I just think recognising that that is a challenge that a lot of organisations face, and there's a high cost associated. And so I suppose that when the way that Hands for Impact is focusing on this, so we have a few commitments. One is cost effective, so we offer our services pro bono to the organisations that we're working with, and then we are collaborative in the approach, and then also take a sector-wide understanding. And our work is, you know, staged in 2 phases, but the idea is to kind of gather kind of sector-wide insights around how different organisations, so youth work organisations, are creating impact, and we use the social return on investment methodology to do that. So yeah, I think the work that we're doing, hopefully will be one area, and the idea is to partner with Aotearoa, and we'll share the work that we're doing, and going to give some recommendations on resources of how to use some of the research we've done, some kind of give recommendations of what a theory of change might look like, and then also recommendations on different surveys and kind of data collection methods. So yeah, that's one area that we're kind of helping at. And then today, I think some kind of key things that I'd say, so firstly about that, just being intentional is a really great starting point, thinking about what is your success, what does success look like, what are the kind of things we need to do to get there. And also a big thing, I think, where possible, is bringing as many people of your team around you. I don't think it's about, as you were saying, like one person in the organization, you know, being that monitoring evaluation lead. Like I think it's about an organizational shift in kind of embedding this in the organization. And I think especially as, you know, when you define like what a metric of success is, if only one person is in the room defining that, then it's not going to be representative of the organization. So just, yeah, coming together, bringing unity on what that looks like, bringing a range of stakeholders into that room, I think is a really powerful starting point.
Shaz, can you share some practical methods that organisations and their communities can demonstrate impact, particularly how evaluations can bring in an equity lens?
Yep, I warned Jane about asking me this question. I could sit here absolutely and say all the things that I do to understand the impact that we're having and that our organisations are having. I think I'm on the SIA data tool more than anyone in this country. It's constantly open in a tab on my computer. I love data. I love understanding the impact of things. It's a real passion of mine, but it's also my full-time job. I am paid to find out. And just as Claudia was saying, organisations are not resourced to understand their impact properly. I can only talk about the organisations that we work with in Invercargill and what they've told me. And I kind of went there not understanding the funding process when I started here, and just hearing from them about what a good funder looks like. And they said, we are so sick of reporting requirements. And I didn't understand, what do you mean? And in my inbox comes this annual grant report. And I was like, this is wonderful. I get to see all this data, and then what do I do with it? I'm the insights lead. I'm the only one that reads it. I write a blurb, send it off to the board. My boss is sitting up there going, oh God, Shaz, what are you doing? But the truth is that we're asking so much of our organisations. One told me that they were spending up to 8 hours on a single grant contract reporting. But that's not happening in the workplace. That's when they go home to their families. That's because they are under-resourced and they're overburdened. They're working for and with our rangatahi and they don't have time. If we want to understand the impact, then we need to resource them to show it. And so that's kind of something... That was a really easy clap to get. Something we are trying to do in Invercargill is I have the skills because I was a journalist and I happen to be a video journalist as well. And so I have videography skills and I love telling stories and I just love researching data and I love finding information for them. And so I just do it for them. I go to them and I have conversations with them and I ask them about the impact. And because we invested in the people and the community, we have deep relationships with them. These people aren't just our grantees. Absolutely don't use that word. They are our friends. And some of them are here supporting me today, which is wonderful. But we work with them, we help them understand their stories, and instead of an annual grant report, I write a news story for them. And the next day it's on the newspaper, because I have those connections. I do videos for them, which means that my team and I are at every one of their events. We are able to talk about the impact that they're having because we are part of making the impact happen. And so I think that that's a really important thing. We're only a small funder, relatively. We're a small funder, so we don't have a lot of resource, but I know that there are so many funders that have literal comms teams. As someone in comms people love telling stories. Send them out into the community. Find out the impact that's happening and get those stories out there because it's the stories that actually matter. And as I said, that's my little rant, but to answer your question, personally, something practical is to elevate the voice of the people impacted by the work. And so I've got a little video of our rangatahi in Te Ohakatiwhera in our fund, because it's not up to me to say, yeah, it's really impactful. It's up to them to tell us. And again, because we've built those relationships, they are quite happy to tell us if we're doing it wrong. So yeah, we'll play the video and you can kind of hear that voice from them.
Awesome.
Has helped rangatahi in our community by providing financial support to initiatives that are uplifting and allow them to have all these new opportunities and experiences that help them with their culture.
I feel like there has been, in the past, a big lack of that in our community in this aspect, and I would like to be able to support initiatives that help connect us as rangatahi to Te Aroha. Really, it's awesome for me, it makes me feel so good.
I think it's helped understanding our community a lot with building self-confidence, self-worth, and the whole point of our fund is to help organisations get to function, start getting this initiative to
So proud.
Awesome. Great work, great work. Okay, we're going to go into some Q&A. Thank you. Okay, cool. So the first question is for Andrew. Organisations have experience of rigorously evaluating their projects, proving that they are making a positive impact, and then funders cut their funding. This results in a massive loss of momentum, relationships, jobs, and integrity. How can we avoid this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I just want to acknowledge we're in a period of particular challenge at the moment, and we see and hear the impact of that. One of the very difficult things in tight financial times, and as we see constraint in government spending, is the decision-making process about how those savings are achieved. And one of the key things that we need to do when we are making disinvestment decisions is understand the impact of those decisions. And so we have got a lot of work to do across government and across the community sector to be able to have a more mature conversation about what is the value of different initiatives. And I think we need to acknowledge it's very difficult to compare one initiative to another when we've got so much variation in the way things are evaluated and understood. So the work of the Social Investment Agency is in part focused on improving our understanding of impact across government investment, and to ensure that when these hard decisions have to be taken, that we're seeing a really strong lens on value and therefore the opportunity cost, what it is that we lose when things are discontinued. But then we also need to acknowledge that in periods where there's disinvestment, it's very uncommon that there are initiatives out there that are adding no value. No one is sitting here saying that there are things that can be stopped without some impact. But equally, government has to set priorities and has to set funding, and then agencies need to ensure that those priorities are put into effect. And so sometimes that leads to things that probably no one would want, but it is a reflection of the times that we're in. I guess what I'm saying is this can get better, and I believe how it gets better is by both in the community sector and then importantly in agencies, we are bringing a much more sophisticated lens to our understanding of the outcomes that are coming from investment, and that's informing our decisions. It doesn't mean things will always be easy. It doesn't mean that things will always be funded, but at least we're all coming at it with a similar understanding. And that's one of the things that it's our job to push back into government and across government as the Social Investment Agency. What I would want to emphasise is that we are in the early stages of implementing social investment under this government, and that please don't attribute necessarily all of the decisions that you're seeing to social investment. Much of that disinvestment is more a reflection of very tight government books as opposed to being driven by a social investment approach. So hopefully that's clear.
Cool. A question for everyone. So we'll just popcorn it. Since that there is a lot of inequality around social of return of investment in the sector, a lot of the organisations can't afford an external process. What can be done when you can't afford an assessment?
Do a good process evaluation, which you build in from your program design, and you measure the indicators you set your indicators and measure them throughout the program, building in cycles of reflection. Yeah, that would be my answer.
I just want to agree with that. This doesn't have to be complicated. For a small organisation with limited capacity to put into evaluation, even just working yourselves through the simple steps of outcomes, for who, how would we know, and making sure that those are being measured, doesn't need an expensive evaluation. Yes, there will be limits on what you can do, but even bringing that thinking to your work can be a really powerful starting point for these conversations.
Yeah, I think we really need to change the narrative around evaluation, because a lot of people think we do evaluation for funders, to show our impact, but evaluation should really be about learning and adapting and growing with the program, because that's what a theory of change is about, right? It's a living framework that constantly changes, and so don't just come at the end and try and collect all the data, just to make these funders happy or whatever. Actually use it as a chance to grow as an organisation.
Cool. Claudia?
Yeah, and I guess this is some of the questions that resulted in Hands for Impact being created in terms of social return investment. And what we're trying to do is take a sector approach that is led from grassroots organisations and build different case studies of what that sort of assessment might look like, and put that within a sector framework, and then publish the work, and kind of build recommendations on how organisations can use that as a starting point. Because sometimes I know it's easier to have examples of how it's done in your sector rather than starting with a blank page, especially when you're time poor and kind of restricted resources. Hopefully this is another tool to add to help with that process.
Cool. Shaz, Te Rauro's approach is an ideal investment strategy. Can it be scaled?
Absolutely, it can be scaled. The whole idea of the initiative is that this is a pilot to understand best practice for a place-based initiative. So I can't take what we've done in Invercargill and copy-paste it into another area, because every area, even in Invercargill, areas have different needs entirely and different ways of addressing them. But what we can do is understand what works when you start the place-based initiative, when you go into a community, how you can show up and value the community as the experts. So, we're not, this is nothing new. This has been happening for a long time, place-based initiatives. But we're kind of just learning what it looks like in our context. But the idea in the future is that we would build a resource of, that's my job, is to understand how this works, how it works the best possible way, and build a resource that anyone else can pick up.
Awesome. Claudia, there's already lots of international and regional evidence that a youth development approach works for young people and communities. Why do we need to go through the monitoring and evaluation process? What are the benefits?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I guess there's different aspects of the question. I think, and as Sarah's really clearly explained, monitoring evaluation is just such a useful exercise for any organisation to go through, because it's about building an approach around reflection and improvement and being dedicated. We're always going to have limited resources, and so how do we create the most amount of change and with those resources that we have? So I think as a process, it's important for any organisation to really follow. In terms of, we know that youth development works, and I think one thing that we're trying to do with our social return investment reports is really align it with third-party research, and we've embedded the Taiohi framework in the methodology that we've gone through, and we've also, gone to the organisations and followed their tikanga and how they approach youth development, and build that into the process. So I think it's more around alignment and taking kind of another step forward, more informed, to then kind of be able to advocate to funders, to policymakers around this, what is being done in communities and in a language that maybe is, they can see.
Andrew, Government contracts don't include the money to support this data collection and outcome measurement. This means the sector competes with each other. Will this be changing?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And firstly, we're leading by example. Through the Social Investment Fund, we're putting a considerable sum into each new initiative to ensure that it's properly evaluated. And the lens there is we do need to understand impact, and it's worth investing in that. I think we can acknowledge that some of the different contracting practices have meant that we've had clauses that require, a high proportion of the money to go all the way through to delivery. And you can sort of understand what that's getting at, which is we don't want to lose a whole lot of funding on administration. Equally, we do need to allow for evaluation. So that's something that we would aspire to see shift over time. And it will take time for that understanding to filter across, but we absolutely acknowledge that that's required. Having said that, there are things that small organisations can do that can make this much more efficient. One of the organisations that our initial demonstration initiatives invested in through the fund is a collective of about 9 small organisations working with whānau. And they've come together and they are doing basically a shared service around data and evaluation and reporting to make it possible for small organisations that otherwise it'd be hard to justify separate evaluation to do that. So there are different ways of working, and it'll need to be a combination of all of the above if we're going to see a shift in this.
Sarah, is the idea of social investment inherently problematic? Are we upholding the status quo of language and thinking frameworks?
Oh, thank you for this question. I love it. It's a good, it's a good deep question. I think social return on investment has a place, right? It's about us, a way of being able to communicate our story in a language that people who understand money understand. And so actually, if we're asking people to contribute money towards a cause and we're saying, look, it gives this much return financially, for those people who speak the language of money, it's really helpful. I don't think it fully can grasp the nuances of individuals and communities in a really in-depth way, and nor can it, when you start to scale things up, it's lovely to see the big picture change, and I love talking strategic and big picture. At the end of the day, what matters most is that individual young person, that particular community, and the change that is made. And what is the best way to determine that? It's with them. And it is, so we talk about youth participation, whaiwahitanga, we talk about community participation in developing those frameworks. But I think it has its limitations. We've got to hold that tension of, yes, it's helpful for us in terms of getting funding and trying to build sustainable organisations and sustainable programs. But if I'm going to put the weight somewhere, I'm going to put it on Taiohi. I'm going to put the weight with Taiohi and whānau and community and our whenua, because all of that stuff matters most. And I think really good social return on investment does try to measure all of those factors, but it's got to be both, right? It's got to be the voice and not just the numbers. Yeah.
Can I jump in on that one quickly too?
Yeah.
Just a couple of things. One is social return on investment is one way of measuring the results of an initiative. We are not equating social return on investment with social investment. In fact, we're not using it at the Social Investment Agency, a social return on investment metric. That's not part of our methodology, in that in that way, or at least that's not how we would describe it. Whatever culture you look at, it is part of the way we work as humans to want to do the things that will make the best difference for our whānau, our community, our society to thrive. And social investment at its heart can be understood about how do we identify the things that would be best to do in order to get the best outcome for us collectively. Social investment, in terms of some of the methods we use, enables us to translate back into terms that every taxpayer can understand the value of the activity. That doesn't mean that we need to impose on communities the methodology, and by that I mean when we're talking to organisations that are working with families and when we're talking to communities, through an outcomes-based approach, we can understand that achieving the aspirations of a whānau or of a young person or of a community will almost always inevitably translate through to outcomes that government cares about. And that can be achieved without us saying how that should be achieved. So there's a lot of room in here for local initiative, for different cultural lenses, for different motivations, for different ways of understanding impact. And we're trying to do that translation in a way that allows that to continue, if that makes sense.
Whānau, we've come to the end of our session. It is 17 past 12, it's lunchtime. Can we please give these great humans a round of applause? I hope that was insightful. I hope that would add value into the amazing work that you are all doing in the different spaces. And I hope it's got your thinking caps on, because there was a lot of gem and gold in that space. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Enjoy lunch and the rest of the day. Malo, whaftai.